Magandang umaga po. Ako po ay narito ngayon na hindi na po nagtatrabaho sa Department of Foreign Affairs. Ako po ay retired na. So, yung pong sasabihin ko sa inyo ngayon is my own. Hindi na po Department of Foreign Affairs. I hope that is clear. Kasi meron po siguro akong masasabi ngayon na medyo salungat sa ginagawa ngayon ng pamahalaan. August 21, 1983. And I use the phrase from Roosevelt, Day of Infamy. You will recall that the breakout of the war in the Pacific was the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And Roosevelt said, it was a day of infamy. We can also say that August 21, 1983 was a day of infamy in Philippine history in two senses. One, ay pinatay po si Diliman. Pagbaba po niya sa Manila International Airport, binaril po siya habang bababa sa hagdan, and he was dead on the tarmac. And it changed Philippine history. We know that. It led to the downfall of President Marcos and becoming president later on of Cory Aquino. But the second point that I say that it's a day of infamy is because on that same day, before Aquino flew to Manila, he passed by Singapore. And I was a personal witness to that incident because I was in the embassy in Bangkok with our ambassador then, General Rafael Eleto, ambassador to Thailand. His job then was to monitor the movement of Ninoy while coming to Manila. And he told me in his office that, Consul, I know Ninoy is now in Singapore and he is motoring to Malaysia. In other words, he just used Singapore as a route to Malaysia. And then, of course, the question arises, why is he in Malaysia? I had no answer at that time, until very much later. And the answer was, Ninoy needed all the support he can get to oust Marcos. And a logical person to do that for him, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Muhammad Mahathir. And now we know that there was a commitment from Mahathir to help oust Marcos, his old enemy on the Sabah issue, when Ninoy comes to power. And in my view, that is the origin of why the government today of Pinoy is somehow bantulot, reluctant. The overwhelming impression is what's holding back our president, what's holding back our government to rescue our own citizens dying in the palm fields of Malaysia. And the answer lies on what happened on that day, on August 21, 1983. In other words, we can speculate that if there was no commitment in 1983 and Cory did not become president, there would have been no commitment. All right? So that is the thesis that I want to bring to you today. That our hands are tied today because the leadership not only at that time, but up to this day, is committed to drop the Philippine claim to Sabah. And what is the clearest proof of this? The clearest proof is found in our Constitution. The 1987 Constitution, Article 1, on national territory, is an amendment of the 1973 Marcos Constitution. And if you compare the two, now, there are 14 words omitted in the 73 Article 1. And what are those words? Well, I wrote it in the paper. The 14 words says
all other territories.
that the other territories belonging to the Philippines by historic right and legal title was deleted. That the claim to Sabah, enshrined in the 73 Constitution, the Marcos Constitution, was totally deleted from the 1987 Constitution. Why did that happen? What was the reason for dropping it? Was it magic? Well, it's because of the 1983 commitment. Cory made sure, and Mahathir made sure, that 14 words be deleted from Article 1. And when that happened, that is the origin of our troubles today. You will recall that in 1982, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea was finally adopted after 10 years of negotiations, the longest ever in the United Nations. It's a very big treaty published in a book of about 300 pages. You can imagine how complex the treaty is. But the Philippines benefited from this convention. Why? The United Nations finally recognized the existence of archipelagic states. What are archipelagic states? As defined in Part 4 of the Convention. Well, as I said, archipelagic states are those states or countries made up of archipelagos. In other words, there may be one or more archipelagos. Okay? It can also include islands, separate from the archipelagos. They can also include parts of islands. Sir, you will agree that Sabah is part of the island of Borneo. Therefore, it can belong to an archipelagic state, like the Philippines. So you see that in 1982, the United Nations has delivered to us the unprecedented opportunity to apply international law to our claims, including that of Sabah. That is 1982. But in 1987, we squandered the opportunity. We amended our Constitution precisely opposed, contrary to what international law has provided. In UNCLOS, how would you explain this kind of administrative or political behavior? There must be very strong lobby somewhere. And where is it? It's right at the top. So we, like me, a small-time bureaucrat, applying the convention, how to maximize the Philippine claim, came up with our own proposals. And we did. as I'm going to show in a map today. Here is a map, a very old one, 1890. You know, this is the portrait of our country when we became a republic. When did we become a republic? Formally inaugurated is January 23, 1899. You know, it's very strange that we do not celebrate this day, but we claim that we are the first republic in Asia, inaugurated on January 23, 1899. But is there a holiday? Nothing, right? But this map here is the portrait of our country when we became a republic. This is map number 2. And the atlas is a book published in Washington, D.C. in 1900 by no less than the United States Coast and Geodetic Survey. And the Superintendent of Documents in Washington praised this map as one of the best in the world at that time. In other words, when we became a republic, when we were born, we already had a national atlas. Not even the United States had a national atlas in 1890 or 1899. And this was made by Filipinos. Except that the supervisor is a Spaniard, Jesuit, Father Alge of the Ateneo Observatorio de Manila. But take a look at this map and see its features, because some of the features shown there can be useful in asserting our claims. Let me now focus on just one small island, which has caused us trouble in the last few months. And what is this island? Bajo de Masinloc. That is the name shown on the map. Bajo, I think, in Spanish means a show. And Masinloc, as you know, is a town of Zambales, which is just across the sea. And today, somebody else says it belongs to them. How come? When our map, prepared when we became a republic, already shows that it is ours. In other words, we are older than the Chinese in becoming a modern republic. Now, how come the Chinese is claiming Bao de Masinloc? What is the basis of the Chinese claim? Well, powerful ships. They have taken it in effect by force. Today, they have already recognized Bajo de Masinloc as part and parcel of the administrative region of Hainan, and our ships is in danger just approaching these islands now. But if history will prevail, this map shows that it's historically always been Philippine territory. But you see here that Sabah is shown, and there are no dividing lines. Unlike the Treaty of Paris, right? Because after this map, the Treaty of Paris maps became the official one for the Philippines. But that was imposed by a colonizer. The real map without the lines is this one. But strangely, not even government offices display the Atlas de Filipinas. Next, I wanted to show you the map now that is now with several lines. several enclosing lines. Of course, the most famous is this big line here, which was the Treaty of Paris. How was it drawn? How did these lines, how they were drawn by the Americans and the Spaniards in Paris in December of 1898? Well, it was simple. I think they went to a map store in Paris and looked for a map of Asia and said, they asked each other, what do we draw the lines and say this is the Philippines? And he says, let's exclude this island, let's include this island, you know. It was totally arbitrary, you know. There were no considerations of what islands were there, who are living there, so that they made a lot of mistakes. You know why they were in a hurry in throwing out the Treaty of Paris? Because it was supposed to be defeated in the Senate, in the US Senate. It was a treaty that is subject to ratification by the Senate. And the count of the votes of the senators is they wanted to reject it. They said colonization is foreign to the American ideology. You see, the Americans fought for their independence. And the senators said, the Filipinos fought for their independence. Let us not absorb them. Let us not conquer them. So there was a very strong opposition in the Senate, and they wanted to reject the Treaty of Paris. But what happened? McKinley began to bribe the senators so they will pass the ratification of the Treaty of Paris. And you know, it only passed with one vote. A plurality of only one vote, 2/3 vote of the US Senate. That is why they were in a big hurry to draw the lines. And they made all sorts of mistakes. And we inherited these mistakes. All right? Now what happened after that? They tried to correct it. They signed another treaty. Okay, let me just show the last map. Because this is the future. You know, I entitled my paper as Lament over the Sabah tragedy. You know, I plan to cry here, crying for those who fell in the fields of Lahadatu. But I changed my mind when I saw you, and there are so many of you. Now, I wanted to celebrate a victory rather than a defeat. The future is, let's fight for it. In the last part of my paper, I said, Quo Vadis in Latin means, where are we going from here? And this map, last map I'm showing you, is where we are going. We will treat our country as consisting of 5 main archipelagos. And what are they? First, the Visayan archipelago. Okay? You see that is a compact set of islands. Here. That is the Visayan archipelago. Nga naman nga, isang archipelago na. Eh, tanan man Bisaya dito. Of course, Luzon archipelago, includes Mindoro, Masbate, etc. And this one is something new. Now we have a Palawan archipelago. Why did we do that? Because the Chinese wants to grab it. So we are giving them more. We included Palawan. The reason for that is we don't want to accept the present law passed by Congress of the regime of islands. That is entirely wrong procedure. We are always an archipelagic state. But the current law passed by Congress in 2009 changed the concept. Now we accepted the island regions for Calayan here. And that is incorrect because you are giving up control over the waters connecting the islands. The only solution is a Palawan archipelago, including what the Chinese is trying to claim in this area. And of course, the most interesting is the Sulu archipelago, which coincides with the Sultanate of Sulu. This is historically the Sultanate of Sulu, and we will recognize it as one of the archipelagos of the Archipelagic Republic of the Philippines. And if you read, that's an ambitious task. But with the men of the Sultan with us, we're going to win.
Yes, we will.
Do you swear to win? You see, for half a century, the Malaysians had one obsession, and that is to keep Sabah for themselves. And I'm sorry to say that we have been outmaneuvered in those 50 years because we were so disunited and we were so ignorant. We didn't know our own country. The challenge today, I hope, not 50 years, but maybe why don't we do it in 2 years? Let us achieve what we call Bisulu Pamit. This is the new name I am giving to the Philippine archipelagic state. Why Bisulu Pamit? Bisaya, Sulu, Palawan,
And Mindanao.
and Mindanao. That is the new name of the archipelagic state. So, put to the crowns and say, welcome to Bisulu Pamit.